Hey everybody, Derick Van Ness here, wealth strategist, investor, and life adventurer. And today I want to talk to you about a topic that's coming up all the time right now in 2020, and it's this. Should I pay off my debt or should I save money? Right? There's a lot of stuff swirling around right now, and by the end of this video, you're going to have a clear idea of whether you should do one or the other or what's appropriate for you, right? And let me just tell you, I've been through this back in 2008, 2009. I had situations where I was carrying credit card debt, but I also had a bunch of cash. And my question was like, do I take my cash and pay off my credit card debt? And now I have less cash, but I got credit, right? And I'm paying less interest. So I don't have to pay the interest, but I also don't have the cash. What are the pros and cons to that? So we're at a really interesting time in the economy right now. And I just have seen recently a couple of newspaper articles or online articles coming out saying that credit card companies are starting to cut certain types of credit lines, right? So that's not necessarily an emergency, but it does mean that the banks are starting to look at their balance sheet and saying, hey, do we need to keep all this credit available to people? Are some of these people higher risk and we want to get rid of those? And so for you as a business owner, as a person, you've got to determine to yourself, like, should I be paying off my credit card? Should I be paying off all my vendors? Should I be putting all that money out there, keeping everybody paid off, but keeping my cash reserves low? I'm not paying interest because my everything's paid off. Or does it make sense to run a little bit of a balance so you have a little bit more cash, right? So I have a guy who I was talking to the other day. He's got an auto shop and they usually run 30 to 60 days on their auto parts for their shop. And he was saying, hey, should I be paying off all my vendors so that we end up not having to owe them in case things get tight? We've got a little bit of a buffer. And I can see where he's thinking, right? The flip side to that is now he's got a lot less cash in his coffers to be able to handle that if things happen. So what should he do? The reality is that he needs to weigh out his cash flow, right? Because here's the problem. If you've got a business and you run out of cash, you can't go to your vendors to get money to pay your team, right? To pay your employees, your staff, the people that make your business go. The only way that you go out of business is if you run out of cash. So I would say, generally speaking, and we're going to talk about some more specifics in just a sec here, but I would say generally speaking, make sure that you have at least 1 to 2 months worth of reserves to run your business in cash if at all possible. If you can do that, now if there's some bumps and bruises along the way, obviously there's been a pandemic this year, there's been other things in the past, the economy is going to go up and down, seasonal stuff, employee changes. You've got the cash as a shock absorber to kind of help you to weather the storm with all that stuff, right? And so having cash is really, really important. Now the flip side of that, of course, is paying interest on credit cards or other types of lines of credit. So here's my advice on that. If you have money on credit cards or lines of credit, I would keep that money as much as possible on the stuff that has really low interest. A lot of us have like a credit card or two that we use for business for all that stuff. If you can take that credit balance, if you want to conserve some cash, roll it over, at least temporarily, onto another credit card with a 0% or a 1% or a 2% limit. Maybe you can roll $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 onto that credit line and let it sit there at 0% interest. In the meantime, you can have cash in the bank if you need it to be able to pay off that card if you ever had to, but now you've created a cash cushion for yourself. Here's why this is so important, is if credit card companies or banks start to cut lines of credit and you're depending on that credit to be able to run your business. In other words, you're using all your cash to pay off the credit cards and pay your team, but then all of a sudden they cut your credit line and you've got no cash because you just paid everyone, you could get caught in a bad spot, right? So what you want to do is you want to balance that, have enough cash, like I said, 1 to 2 months worth of reserve if at all possible, to be able to pay your team, keep credit cards paid off at that point. But if you don't have that 1 to 2 months worth of reserves, I would potentially keep some cash in a very low interest environment. In other words, borrow cash, get a cheap loan, all the SBA loans and EDIL loans and all the stuff that are out there. Those are super cheap debt. Or put it on a credit card where you can get a 0% loan, right? Take it from a regular credit card, roll it over as a balance transfer onto a low interest credit card, and you can buy yourself a little bit of time that way. in today's world, we just don't quite know what's going on. So I think, if anything, remain cash heavy, even if you got to pay a little bit of interest, but take that interest and really work hard to optimize it. Keep it in the lowest interest type of borrowing and loans that you possibly can. If you can do that, you should be able to keep yourself in a good spot. Now, the reality is you also want to pay attention to your cash flow. If you're going negative every single month right now, you got to turn that around, or you need to get real with yourself about your costs and about what's going on with your business. You need to look ahead 3, 6, 9 months. Are we going to make it? Okay. If not, you need to really heavily consider what credit you do have, because at some point, if things go wrong, you're going to be stuck with that credit on your credit, right? And you could ruin it, have to file bankruptcy, whatever. So you got to be realistic with yourself. But general rule of thumb, if at all possible, have 1 to 2 months worth of business expenses set aside in cash. Keep everything paid off over and above that. If you don't have that 1 to 2 months, you may want to consider putting some money on a cheap line of credit, not paying that off, and keeping the cash reserves so that you can be sure to protect yourself, your business, and your employees. Okay? So hopefully that's simple enough for you. If you have other questions, because I know that there's lots and lots of scenarios here, drop them in the chat box below. If you like this video, please be sure to consider subscribing, but definitely hit that like button. It really helps us to get the word out to more people. I know a lot of people are wondering about, should I pay off debt or should I keep it in cash? That's absolutely a great idea to consider and pay attention to. Anyway, my name's Derick Van Ness. I appreciate you stopping by. Feel free to catch us on the next video. I'm sure you'll enjoy this one, and we'll see you then.